Welcome to Story Chat Radio. We are book editors Carly Hayward and Jenny Chappell. Every month we watch a different movie with an eye for storytelling and novel writing.
We use our years of training and experience editing novels to break down each movie's storytelling elements to help you improve your novel in progress.
Warning, Jenny ruins everything.
Hey, you ruin things too.
So don't be surprised if there are spoilers. On this episode, we are discussing the instant classic Knives Out, and then we will end with a critique of one lucky author's query.
So, Carly, what have you been up to over the course of this kind of little hiatus we had?
Working. Rev Pit. Rev Pit is a lot of work.
It is.
But it was so much fun this year. There were amazing authors. I'm very excited about working with my winner. I've basically just been in a little Rev Pit bubble. What about you?
Yeah, I'm in that bubble with you. And we started that Camp Rev Pit this year to act as a sort of like a way to ease people out of that contest bubble. Because it's so much fun. It's almost like a carnival atmosphere with all the games and all the interaction. And it's kind of sad to see that go away. So Camp Rev Pit was such a huge success. We got 50 author volunteers who each, they managed over 100 positivity passes, critique queries, query critiques, first pages critiques. We also set up some, we're calling them cabins to go along with the camp theme.
It's very cute.
Yeah, that are writing groups for people to encourage each other. And the author who was in charge of that decided to run it almost like a NaNoWriMo cabin. And they were encouraging each other to reach their revision or writing goals. So I've gotten lots of feedback about how fantastic the whole event was. And of course we kept up games as well. And it seems like a lot of people were really able to get the feedback they needed, get the support they needed, and jump into their next phase of revisions through this. So
that's so
it
great.
was, I'm really excited about it. And I really hope we can do it again in future years.
Do it again.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So I'm excited for us to get together and talk about Knives Out because it's such a fun movie. And like you said in the intro, it was just an instant classic. Like I think we both saw it in theaters.
We did.
And then watched it again for the podcast. And even when I saw it in the theater, I was like, yeah, this is like, people are going to love this.
Yeah. I went and all of my friends were like, have you seen Knives Out yet? Have you seen it? How about now? Have you seen it? I'm like, okay, I'm going. I got it. And I loved it. Yeah. But like usually with that kind of a build up, it's not very good. And I was like, yeah, no, I get it. I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. So let's get into the summary of that movie. So here come the spoilers. This movie revolves around a wealthy mystery writer. So it's worth seeing just because it's about a writer.
I know, it's perfect.
Right. So his name is Harlan. He committed suicide and it was suspicious. And so the story revolves around that and then his family full of suspects. Someone hires a famous detective. We don't know who it is at the beginning. So this detective comes in to investigate if it was really a suicide, and that starts this classic whodunit scenario. As the family comes together to mourn his death and answer questions, it's revealed, of course, that they all had motives, including Harlan's nurse and friend, Marta, who's she's really the main character. And she's a suspect because everything was left to her in his will. So the really twisty thing about this movie is that we find out pretty early on that Marta accidentally gave Harlan an overdose of morphine that meant he only had 10 minutes to live, and it wasn't enough time for help to arrive because of the remote location of his home. Being the quick-thinking writer that he was, Harlan came up with a plan to make it look like suicide by slitting his own throat and removing suspicion from Marta. So she knows that throughout the course of the story. And as she helps the detective investigate, she takes steps to hide evidence against her. So through the course of the story and the investigation, all the family secrets come out, and it turns out that Harlan's grandson, Ransom, played by Chris Evans, and his amazing sidekick, the fisherman sweater, which we
Love
all love so
that.
much.
So good.
He switched the vials so that Marta would give Harlan the wrong medicine. It meant that she accidentally gave him the correct medicine, and Harlan killed himself for nothing. So it was just a real, such a twisty movie with lots of stuff that you couldn't see coming. So Ransom was trying to frame her for Harlan's death, but failed. And then the story ends with Marta in control of this huge mansion and all the rest of this awful family out on their own to deal with their lives and hurting each other. So what did you think overall of the movie, Carly?
I loved it, as was already established. I'm happy to watch it again. We could just end the podcast here, go watch it.
All right, let's do that.
Okay, goodbye. No, but as I said, I saw it in theaters, so this was my second time. And I knew as soon as I watched it in theaters that you and I were going to have to talk about this movie. It's a very us movie. And I felt like it really brought back the Agatha Christie mystery mansion kind of vibe, and I just loved it. But it was still fresh and interesting, and part of that I think was the amazing cinematography, but it was still really clever. And like, even though it nails all of the tropes, it does it in a very clever way. It's not necessarily upending any tropes or flipping them around, but it's doing them so exquisitely well that it's very, very enjoyable. So I wasn't super surprised by any of the twists personally.
Sure.
But I was very much in love with the whole journey and putting the clues together myself. And on the second viewing, there's definitely tons of hints I missed on the first watch through. So
Same
it was
for me.
It was definitely fun to be like, oh yeah, okay, now I see that. I don't know why I missed that, kind of a thing. And yeah, just the cinematography mainly I was very focused on during this viewing. Just like all of the visual framing devices were just so gorgeous. And the set design was amazing. I think my only initial problem was Daniel Craig's accent, his southern accent. But I feel like on my second viewing, I kind of got into it in a weird way. I was like, okay, I see it. What'd you think?
Yeah, I loved it too. A lot of what you said really resonated with me. I think that part of the aspect of the tropes was, yes, using them exquisitely. Tropes, of course, are always about playing with your reader's expectations. So when you know what a trope for your genre and, your age category, that kind of thing is, then you can use it to, what your readers are going to expect when you employ these certain tropes. And I think while, again, it wasn't anything really groundbreaking in terms of taking these tropes and doing something amazingly new with them, I think what it did do is it created this sense of, there weren't any surprises per se. It was just fun to see how it was all going to come together.
Exactly.
Which I think when you read a lot or you watch a lot of movies and you know a lot about tropes, that can be just as much fun as, tropes that are a little different or have fresh twists on them. So I think that part was really cool about it. But I'm totally on board with the Southern accent thing from the first episode. From the first viewing, as someone who lives in the South, bad Southern accents are a huge pet peeve for me. And I was just like, why?
It was so jarring. I was just like,
gosh.
The first moment he spoke, I was like, what is happening? I can't.
I know. I
Okay,
know.
James Bond.
I know. So my thing with Daniel Craig was like his eyes always been that blue? It was like a startling blue.
The answer is yes. Yes,
Yeah.
they
Well,
have.
honestly, I haven't seen a lot of movies with Daniel Craig in them. I'm not a huge James Bond fan.
Mm.
And so I had never noticed that before, but I kept like getting lost in them. But even those elements, the Southern accent, those bright blue eyes focusing on that, those are intentional. Like you said, they're playing with those tropes. So the detective no one takes seriously is a gem and a staple of cozy mysteries like
Yeah.
Agatha Christie stories. And I have to digress for a moment because, mysteries are one of my favorite genres. My parents were mystery authors. So I grew up on Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie and even
Mm-hmm.
Nancy Drew, Encyclopedia Brown. Um,
All amazing.
right. And I remember reading my first Agatha Christie novel and thinking it was so obvious who done it. Because I knew all those tropes already, even though
Right.
like I had no idea at the time what the word trope even meant. Um, but then as I got older, I learned more about Agatha Christie and that she created so many of those tropes. And so
Yeah.
honestly, it just gave me such a deep respect for her that I went on a binge of all of her books and all those old masterpiece movies and
Mm-hmm.
like mini series with Poirot and Miss Marple. So anyhow, I can go on and on about Agatha Christie. Um, but I guess we should talk about the podcast, like what writers
No.
could take from this.
What? Wait, what are we doing? No.
So what did the movie do well that writers can use in their writing?
Okay, fine, work time. I think it's laying out clues and red herrings.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, this is all mysteries and it's pretty basic to the mystery genre, but it is actually very hard to do well.
Yes.
And this movie does it so perfectly that it really, I think, is a good bar to set and a good way to research how to do those things.
Mm-hmm.
If we dig down into what is a satisfying mystery, it can be applied to all genres because most books have some sort of big reveal or some sort of secret that
Mm-hmm.
is unearthed or twisted at some point. So it can be applicable to more than just the mystery genre, but let's focus on what this does. So, usually, my biggest piece of advice that I give to all mystery authors is that you want readers to guess your big reveal,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, you want them to feel clever for having guessed it.
Right.
So you're not trying to surprise them necessarily. You want to have enough clues in there that they're going to pick up on it and start to piece it together. And if you do surprise them, if they don't guess it, you want them to be able to think back very quickly and remember all of the clues that you have laid out for them and go, oh, yeah, now I see. I totally get it. Of course. That's what it was. I know that's easier said than done, but it's a good guideline to kind of keep in mind as you're laying out all of those little tidbits and clues. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. That's such an important aspect in terms of the pacing of information reveal. Red herrings, like you mentioned, are super important. We really have to make sure that when the big reveal happens, it doesn't come out of nowhere.
Exactly.
So surprising your readers is always fun, and it's hard with mystery because it is in everything, and we do see those tropes. It can be hard to really surprise readers, especially really people who read a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, surprising isn't always 100% the goal, but you do want to make sure that the reader doesn't end up with this feeling of like, where did that even come from?
Exactly.
So being able to look back over the course of those clues is really important. I love books that give me that moment of, yes, the clues were there the whole time, and I just didn't think they were important, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So mystery, possibly more than any other genre, has a rigorous format. really points you have to hit beyond plot points. So I just want to reiterate that even if you aren't writing a straight up murder mystery novel, it's important to understand how mysteries work because it is a staple of so many other stories.
Yep.
Any story where the characters have to figure something out is using that format for a mystery to some extent, whether it's who's hurting people in a contemporary urban fantasy, or where they need to go next in a science fiction, or even what happened in a character's past that affects them in a romance novel.
Yep.
Regardless of genre or age category, revealing information in a way that's satisfying for readers requires a strong understanding of those elements of mystery. So, a lot of authors and readers have sort of an inherent understanding of this without really needing to study it, but it never hurts to solidify your skills as an author. So, that's my biggest takeaway for authors from this movie is just think about the elements of mystery in your own manuscript and how or if you can strengthen the story with those stronger mystery skills.
Yep. So I think one of the biggest keys to a successful mystery is to give multiple people, or in this case, basically everyone, a very, very plausible motive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if only one reason or one person has a reason to commit the crime, then it's very obvious who did it.
Right.
And if there are only two people that could have committed the crime, then the moment you exonerate one, it's obviously the other one. So it's nice to have a lot of characters that could have done it, had a reason to do it, had an opportunity to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as satisfying to narrow down who did it by crossing other people off the list.
Mm-hmm.
You want to pepper in those clues so they're putting together the puzzle pieces. And if you're just letting them cross off everybody until the big reveal, you're kind of losing out on that surprise, or you're letting the mystery go as you proceed. You're not giving them that moment where it still could be multiple people and you're revealing who it is.
Mm-hmm.
Just maintain your possibilities for as long as possible. And then if your reader has been paying attention, they'll see that most of the clues, or at least the obvious clues, have been pointing to a very specific suspect or reveal.
Mm-hmm.
The way this movie does it, all of Harlan's kids and one of his grandkids are suspects. And I love the first act of this movie because it's just revealing how they all are constantly lying to the detectives to hide their own motives.
Yeah, it's kind of hilarious too.
It
really
so
adds
good.
so much humor to it because they're so adamant when they're speaking to the detective, but then we see in their flashback sort of memories
what actually happened.
Yeah, and it's just completely opposite of what they tell him.
Yes, exactly. It's just so cool because they present this like vision of their life that they want to be real. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily that they're always lying to hide their motive, but they're lying because that's how they present themselves to the world. Mm-hmm. They don't want other people, even a detective, to know that, oh no, I might publish with my father, but he gave me zero control and right. I have nothing to do in my job because he doesn't let me do anything. It's right. Yes, it's a motive, but it's also just a shameful thing for that character mm-hmm. that he doesn't want to present. So yeah, they're presenting all those different like visions of their life versus what they want to be real. Which brings me to my actual favorite bit of this movie. And it's a very small moment, but while they're talking to the detective, they're each remembering or claiming to be surrounding Harlan as he blows out his birthday candles.
Right.
So they're all talking about the night of the murder. It's Harlan's birthday party. They're all around him. He blows out the candles, and in each version of the events, we're seeing whoever is speaking is the one that's right next to him blowing out those birthday candles. And I think part of it could be that they're lying, but to me it's more that it shows how fickle memory can be and how subjective it is, because everyone is unreliable because they view the world through their very own particular lens.
Right, right.
So
And
they
that's so
might,
important when you have
yeah,
multiple suspects,
it
that
is.
you're not only looking at that they're flat out lying, but also what are they just filtering because that's
Yes,
how they see the world. Yeah,
right. Yeah, they probably all remember being right next to Harlan as he's blowing out the candles because that was the important position.
right,
And they felt that they were next to him, whether or not they actually were.
right, right.
I don't think we ever get the truth
Mm-mm.
in that, and it doesn't matter. But I just love this little moment, and because I love unreliable narrators, and everybody's unreliable.
It's true. And it also speaks to there not being like one objective truth, which I think
Yes.
is, again, super important when it comes to any kind of mystery or, I mean, honestly, just life. We could probably get into that a whole lot more. um, so have I mentioned Agatha Christie?
I don't think so.
So not long ago, I watched the newest remake of Murder on the Orient Express, which has had this amazing cast, just absolutely amazing. And I also may have watched Clue within the last month. So
I did too. I
I did
love that
say I
movie.
like mysteries, right? So anyway, I bring this up because these are two other stories that employ the same tactic of giving everyone a motive. I've actually seen a lot of people comparing Knives Out to Clue
Yep.
because of that, and it's got that closed room, like everybody's in this big mansion together, kind of theme, and also because it has this, it's so campy and fun, right?
Yes. I love
Um,
Clue.
so I think what you said too, I want to kind of touch on, that the fun part of any mystery is trying to put those clues together. So again, I know mystery readers who read cozy mysteries primarily that can read a book a day.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read that much, like you pick up on tropes really fast. And those are the readers that it's really hard to surprise. So, so a lot of those readers are going to see through sort of standard tropes, but it's still fun for them to put that mystery together.
Yeah.
And so having multiple plausible suspects keeps your brain working through. Um, so you stay really engaged with the story all the way to the end. And the most important aspect of a suspect being plausible is tying their actions to their emotional wounds and their underlying motivations.
Yes.
So you thought you were going to get out of talking about characterization this month, didn't
Never.
you? But I think what you were saying about kind of seeing what happened through the filter of each character's own worldview, their own lens, and then also seeing that that kind of aspect of, are they hiding their motives, or are they like, are they lying, how much of it is intentional?
Mm-hmm.
I think it really, all of that really speaks to each of their emotional wounds. And so if you look at the different characters, you know, you can see, so like you brought up his son. So his lies, whether intentional or not, revolve around his own emotional wound regarding
Yep.
his father and his work with his father, kind of feeling like he's never going to be good enough for him. Nothing he ever does is ever enough. Um, so that really speaks to this very deep level of this character's emotional state. So it can be really tricky in writing to make sure that you're getting all of that stuff in there, and in a way that doesn't give us these huge information dumps to get everything in there. But it's so important because nothing will kill a mystery faster than the reader or viewer not understanding a character's actions and motivations.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to make sure you keep everything psychologically sound, and you've done your work on the back end to make your characters three-dimensional. And again, the best way to show that on the page is usually through character reactions, whether that's what's inside the main character's head or the dialogue and body language of a secondary character.
Yeah. Are they lying to themselves or are they lying to your detective?
Right.
Those are very distinct actions and reactions, and they're very important.
Right.
Yep. I think laying out clues is very tricky.
It is.
You want to put them in the book, but you don't want a big giant red arrow pointing to it saying, "This is a clue, look at me."
Right.
So looking at this movie, I think one of the most successful clues is actually two clues. And we get them very early on in the movie. And I don't think I realized they were clues my first time around.
Mm-hmm.
So clue A is that Ransom is the person that most resembles Harlan.
Mm-hmm.
Harlan says very clearly while he's playing a game with Marta that they are basically the same person.
Mm-hmm.
Then clue B is when Marta is struggling to find the antidote to the overdose. Harlan is super unconcerned, which shows how much he trusts Marta,
Mm-hmm.
and also a little bit of his writerly distraction.
Mm-hmm.
But so he's unconcerned. He starts taking notes in his little writerly notebook about ideas for a new book. Because this is what a great mystery this is.
Mm-hmm.
Look at how easy it is to kill someone like this. And he basically lays out the entire solution to the big mystery.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "Oh, wouldn't it be easy to switch the drugs? And you would just have to make sure that they give them the wrong one. However, the only problem is, what do you do with the antidote? You would have to make sure the antidote goes missing." And lo and behold, the antidote has gone missing.
Mm-hmm.
So those two pieces tied together are clearly, oh, he figured out how the crime was committed, and who's the most like him? Ransom.
Right.
There you go. There's your answer very, very early on. But I think the key to it is that it's such a high stress moment with other way more important things going on.
Mm-hmm.
So it's easy to kind of not pay attention or ignore the old man scribbling in his notebook. But if you distract your readers with other high tension moments as your clues are revealed, it can really make it feel authentic because it's not as obvious.
Right.
He's doing something that feels very natural to his character, but it's still this giant, big red clue that you're going to ignore because, oh man, is she going to find the antidote? What is she going to do when they don't find it?
Right.
What is going to happen? And
Well,
then,
and really, mysteries should be pretty emotional books.
yes.
We're dealing with death, loss, grief, sadness. A lot of times there's anger involved. So really, and we're talking literally life and death stakes here. So really, mysteries need high tension, even in a cozy format, which this would technically count as a
I think so, yeah.
cozy format, because he's not a police officer. So yeah, even in a cozy format, you're still going to have that high intense emotional state, and you're absolutely right that is such a great tool to use to kind of hide those clues.
Yep. But they still have to feel authentic. So,
Yes.
like I said, Harlan writing in his notebook feels natural because what else is this old man going to do while his life is on the line? Of course he's going to write. And when he's talking about Ransom being so similar to him, it's not an out of the blue comment. They're having their basically debriefing after the party and discussing all of the relatives and all of their motives and all of his feelings on them. He distracts by talking about how concerned he is that he kind of cut them all off at this moment. So the Ransom comment just kind of slides right in there and doesn't feel like the most important thing he's saying. And it's just like a very, very strong moment, and it's wonderfully written or shown,
Yeah. I think
that
it
I
goes
think you
back
can
to
learn a lot from.
yeah, and I think it goes back to understanding the characters again. Like,
Yes.
this is true to this character. It might be weird for somebody else to do it, but for this character who, his whole life is the stories in his head, having that almost disconnection from what's happening in reality because he's in his head thinking about the story part of it, I think is very true to that character.
Right.
So that's something that you want to make sure that you are keeping in mind with all of that too.
Yes. Yeah. The moment they act out of character, it's obviously a clue.
Yeah, and that's also something to take into consideration. Again, we're kind of focusing on murder mysteries here, but it's also something to take into consideration with other genres, is making sure that those high tension moments, you're slipping the clues in, you're keeping the all the characters involved in their sort of natural characteristics and traits and motivations.
Yeah.
So that's all a really great tip for any genre as well.
Yes. And I think distracting them in that moment with red herrings is very helpful. Like I
Mm-hmm.
said, with his family, having motive so you don't pay attention to the ransom comment. And then there's like the biggest red herring of all is that Marta believes she killed him.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it shows that people are very unreliable, not just because of what they perceive, but because of the information they have at any given moment
Right.
is not the whole truth. So she believes it, and it's always a possibility that the murder was an accident, as she believes. Like, we could go most of this movie assuming that it's only about the detective uncovering this accident that Marta did.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there isn't an ulterior motive. And I think there's two pieces or two clues that point to the idea that it definitely wasn't just Marta.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure there are others, but these are the two that I noted. One is Harlan's mother claiming to have seen Ransom,
Mm-hmm.
which our detective Blanc very clearly points out at the end.
Mm-hmm.
We see her mistake Marta for Ransom, and she says, "Ransom, you're back again." But viewers immediately dismiss it because it seems obvious that she is just out of it. She thinks Marta is Ransom. The way she phrases it doesn't seem that odd. It's just she's clearly unreliable. I keep saying unreliable, but it's very important in mysteries. But she does say, "Ransom, you're back again," which implies that he's come back multiple times. So this would be his second time returning.
Right.
And then the other big piece of evidence is the dogs bark when someone returns to the house, that we know because one of the daughters wakes up from the dogs barking. And it's very completely dismissed because we don't really get to see the dogs barking at many people except for Ransom. When Marta comes back, we see that the dogs just run up to her and they don't bark when she's sneaking back into the house. And it's such a minor moment that is easily dismissed. Like maybe they barked at first, or it was enough of a hubbub that it woke up the daughter. But no, it's a piece of evidence that actually it was Ransom returning, and the dogs don't like Ransom, so they barked. And then so all of these little bits, when it's our big reveal happens, we're not necessarily surprised by it because all of those little bits kind of fall into place. And if you are surprised, you're like, oh, I see now, because the dogs barked and Ransom came back and he's just like Harlan and here's how he did it.
Right.
It all kind of trickles and fits into this little puzzle that is just really perfectly done.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. You mentioned Harlan's mom,
Yes.
which reminds me, we haven't yet talked about which female side character
Was it the mom for
is
you?
most important and that we wanted to see more about. She's definitely high on my list. Like, I found her really, first of all, I just have a thing about like the, like, old woman character in any story. It's just kind of
Because you're
always,
old.
I think that's it. Yeah. I think it's
Yeah.
because I was born like 95 inside. And so like around this period in my life, I'm kind of catching up inside to the outsides. Because I think I'm getting younger inside as I get older. It's a very complicated situation. But also because the actress was familiar to me. She was Clark Kent's mom on Lois and Clark, which I
Oh
watched when I was a
boy.
kid. So I recognized her, and it just kind of had, and she's older, but she's not as old as she seemed in this movie.
Right.
And also I think something that they employed there to make her easier to dismiss is that because of her age and because she was quiet, we could assume that she has dementia,
Yep.
which again is playing with readers' expectations. It's playing with stereotypes. So I think, anyway, yeah, she was definitely one of my, she was definitely one of the characters that I wanted to know more about. Like, I kind of want to like know her story.
I do too. And her
And also,
relationship with Harlan would be
and
interesting.
and so, you know, Harlan is not a young man.
Right.
He has, you know, grown grandchildren. So for his mother to still be around, like she is definitely elderly.
Mm-hmm.
And he so she's still alive after he has died, which adds this whole other layer of depth and interest to her character for me.
I love the
Um,
moment where our Daniel Craig detective is sitting
mhm.
with her and
That's what
is
I was just
like,
gonna say.
yeah, it's such a good moment. He's like, no one is paying attention to you and you just lost your son.
Yeah.
Like, wow. And it's just nicely done. Sorry,
And
what were you going to
also,
say about it?
well, I was gonna say that, but also that because she's quiet and everybody dismisses her, she has known all of these people from the time they were born, right?
Yep.
So she knows all of their personalities, all of their little secrets, everything that's happened in their life. She's been there for all of that. And that person has so much insight in real life. You know, in real life, that person has so much insight into their family members. And of course, that doesn't mean they always know them as well as they think they do. But I think it was just a really fun, interesting character. And so, yeah, I wanted to see a lot more about her.
I liked her. I think the other one for me would be Harlan's daughter. God, I forget her name, but
Yeah.
the woman that's Ransom's mother.
Yeah. That Jamie Lee Curtis plays.
Yes.
Yes.
I loved her because she was actually one of his most solid children.
She was. She was like maybe the least despicable of all of them.
Yeah, I kind of thought she was cool, and I love her little games with her father of hiding clues,
Yeah.
and her kind of just writing off her husband as soon as she finds out he's cheating,
Yeah.
even though it's at this big moment where their son is arrested for murder, and she's
Yeah.
just like smoking her cigarette and like, oh, time
Yeah.
to move on, I guess. And it was
Definitely.
just like, I love you.
She was great. She was great. And really, we haven't talked a whole lot about Marta because we're talking about the stories, and she certainly isn't a secondary character. She really is our
I know
main
she's
character.
our main character. She's amazing.
She is, and she's such a neat character, and they gave her such an interesting backstory, and her quirk of not being able to lie without vomiting
It's
is
so
so
good.
weird.
I love it. And I want it to be a real thing.
It's such a strange, interesting, just quirky character trait that really added a really interesting level of engagement and depth for the characters.
Yep.
So I will say though that if you haven't yet watched this story and you have a problem with people vomiting,
Yes, it happens a lot.
you need to be very aware of that going into it because that is
Yeah.
hard.
For someone who can't lie, she lies a lot.
Right, right. Okay, so to go back to clues,
Yes.
and kind of passing out clues and all of that. And this speaks a little bit to red herrings as well. A mistake I really see often in giving clues is relying too heavily on interrogation and dialogue. It means that the
Mm-hmm.
characters are literally telling everything to the reader, and it takes away from that balance of show and tell in the story, as
Yes.
well as the detective or the protagonist's agency. I see a lot of times when you read just kind of like a blog post or something about showing and telling, that one of their tips is always to reveal information through dialogue, because that's a way of showing it and not telling it, which is a great tip, but it's not an absolute rule, as the case is with pretty much
Mm-hmm.
everything in writing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that dialogue is not always showing per se, because
Yeah.
dialogue can still be telly. You can still have
It's very
very,
telly
yeah,
sometimes.
you can have very exposition heavy dialogue that still then feels very telling.
Yes.
So consider what other ways you can get someone, you can reveal that information. If you're thinking about the mystery of a story that's another genre, it might not always seem obvious that the main character is a detective. So consider what ways your protagonist takes on the role of detective. Are they actively seeking out clues? This might mean research online or in books or periodicals, depending on, the setting. Going to different locations, finding physical evidence, and yeah, some interrogation. But just like everything else in a story, though, you want to make sure you have plenty of variety to avoid repetition and maintain the reader's interest. So, can I talk about Agatha Christie some more?
I mean, I would say yes, definitely.
Uh,
Like, please. I don't think we've talked about her enough yet.
did you know that she mysteriously disappeared for
Yes,
10
I
days at
did.
one point and had amnesia afterward?
Yes, I
Like,
love it. It's
oh my
so
God.
good. Have
But
you
like,
seen the Doctor Who episode?
I have. And so there was like a whole conversation around like, was she just doing it for publicity? Or I guess it happened within a very short period of time. Her mom died and her husband was
Husband.
unfaithful.
Yep.
And then she disappeared for just 10 days. And when they finally found her, she was like, oh, I don't know what happened. I
I
love
don't
it.
know.
I
It's
love it.
definitely a mystery.
I
I
know.
didn't just have a breakdown and hide in a hotel for a little bit. Don't even ask
When
me.
my mom died, like I totally would have done that if I could have.
Oh yeah.
If I could have just dropped off the face of the planet, totally would have.
Yes.
Okay, I can keep going, but I won't. Instead, I think it's time for us to talk about our query of the month. This month, we have a query from a young adult urban fantasy. Carly, what were your thoughts about this query?
First of all, I love the sound of this manuscript. It
Yes.
has shape shifting dragons that frequent a bookshop where our main character works. And
What
I'm
more
like,
could you even want
no, sign
in
me
a
up right
book,
now. I'm
right?
excited. Totally love it. But I think what was missing here is that we're very focused on setting the stage. And
Mm-hmm.
while it's very charmingly done with a lot of voice, we get basically two setups that are very repetitive. Our
Mm-hmm.
first two paragraphs basically repeat each other in a different way. There's not enough focus on the romance because that seems to be a big element to the story, or this mysterious puppet master that's controlling everything for the main character. Those two pieces are thrown in very nonchalantly at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the query. And I think they're meant to hook us, but instead it feels like it's coming out of nowhere. I want more invested into that mystery and the romance
Mm-hmm.
because that's where the story kind of hinges, and we need more tension related to that.
Mm-hmm.
So tease us more, make it a bigger point, and as we say in almost every query critique, focus on the stakes.
Yeah.
So, what is the tension of the book, and what does that tension put at risk? Show
Mm-hmm.
us that in your query. What do you think?
I agree with everything you just said. I just want to add to it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The heart of urban fantasy is really a mystery. And so, like you said, at the end of this query, it hints at a mystery. But because this really needs to be the main plot of this story, the query really needs to focus on that. So, in addition to just having a well written query, you need to make sure your query is really setting the reader, the agent, up for understanding the beginning of the story that they're going to read. So, you want to make sure that your query and your pages kind of match each other.
Yep.
And so the other issue that gives this query kind of a sense of vagueness is that the author uses a lot of kind of $1 million words.
Mm-hmm.
So some of them are big words, but what's more important is they aren't really words we'd use in casual conversation. So it creates this sense of like over formality. Is that
Yep.
a word? Am I
Yeah.
am I using $1 million words? I may
Yeah.
be questioning my whole existence right now.
I'll talk you down after. Don't
Okay,
worry.
okay,
It's
okay.
okay.
Anyway, so that can create a distance for your reader um, when you frequently have words that kind of stand out from the tone or style or voice of the rest of the writing. It can kind of pull the reader out of what they're reading. So for the most part, you need to keep queries simple and conversational. So choose one or two places per paragraph where you can use more like majestic wording, but do it with intent to create tension.
All about that tension.
Yep,
All right. So I think that brings us to the end of Knives Out, which is quite the shame.
it is. I feel
But
like we could go on much longer about this one.
I feel like we can every podcast.
It's
Maybe we
true.
should make it like a 2 hour podcast. That's
Maybe
what people
six.
want.
Maybe like
6
six
sounds good.
hours.
I would do
Yeah.
6.
Yeah,
Okay.
totally.
Okay. Next time.
Next month
Yep.
it'll be 6 hours.
Speaking of, on our next podcast, we will be discussing the Greta Gerwig version of Little Women. And we will also have another query or blurb critique. So if you want your query featured on the podcast, you can find the details about how to do that on our Twitter page.
You can find our podcast on our website, storychatradio.com, or you can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, or many other streaming services. While you're there, please leave us a rating. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at StoryChatRadio.
Thanks for joining in our nonsense.